this deal has been fragile from the beginning. It's been fragile in the middle of this deal so far, and now it's fragile at the point where they're trying to either extend phase one or negotiate phase two. There's a really big development that happened today. Remember, the ceasefire was set to expire. The first phase of the ceasefire was expected to end on Saturday. Here we are on Sunday with this big news that Israel has stopped this aid from coming into Gaza after Hamas rejected the deal that Steve Witkoff apparently put in plan or tried to put into place. This is a really big deal. Remember, the first phase of this ceasefire deal that I covered extensively was the release of these 38 hostages that have come out so far in the first phase. That includes 5 Thai nationals who were kidnapped on October 7th. There is a renewed approach and dire need to get the hostages out, which is what, of course, the government is trying to push to ensure all of the hostages come out, including the bodies that are still inside of Gaza right now. So this news that this aid has stopped, of course, it's a huge deal because it shows that there is obviously a pause in what has happened with the ceasefire deal.
Yeah, and we were meant to be going into stage 2 of the ceasefire agreement. So I guess all bets are off until we know what's going to happen with this ceasefire extension demand.
Yeah, and this deal has been fragile from the beginning. Remember, there was a point in time where Hamas actually tried to delay one of the hostage releases at one point in this. Everyone kept saying, this is a fragile deal. It has been fragile from the beginning. I do think it's very possible things could turn around. We've seen bumps in the road when it comes to this 42-day first phase of the ceasefire. It's possible this could be another bump and things could progress in the future when talks hopefully will progress at some point, which will hopefully bring more aid in and also see the release of the rest of the hostages. We know that the proposal that the U.S. helped put in place for this next phase of this deal would have released half of the hostages at some point, with, of course, the full goal in getting the hostages, all of the hostages back, including the bodies that are in Gaza at this time. I do think that there's a possibility things could change because it's been shaky. It's been walking on eggshells since the beginning. Things are very up in the air, and I think there's hopefully a way that things can progress in the future.
I mean, I must admit, given what's been going on over the last year or so, the fact that any hostages have been released and that the ceasefire has held to the degree it has, I think should almost a miracle. Just want to put something to you that's coming from a listener called Bob, who says, Israel is in breach of the peace deal, changes the deal, and then punishes starving women and children. It makes no sense. Please present the reality, not just Israeli propaganda. How would a comment like that go down in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, so the Israeli government did say today that the amount of aid that has gone into Gaza over the last 42 days could help and could actually help the population for the next 4 to 6 months. They're saying there was so much aid that went in. Of course, everybody will have their opinions. And as a reporter here, people on the ground want to see the ceasefire happen. They don't want to see a return to war inside of Gaza, although a lot of people here in Israel are worried about the future of security when it comes to Israel because of the Palestinian prisoners who have been released. They worry, as some of the prisoners who have and were serving several life sentences for plotting terror attacks inside of Israel were freed at some point in this deal. It's important to realize that people here in Israel stand on a spectrum of opinions, and they will continue to, especially as things progress. Hopefully they do in the right direction.
So what happens now? I mean, withholding the humanitarian aid, if, as you say, or seem to be insinuating that the Gazans have got plenty humanitarian aid as it is, what leverage then is required to get the ceasefire extended? Where do you see things going from here?
Like I said, this deal has been fragile from the beginning. It's been fragile in the middle of this deal so far, and now it's fragile at the point where they're trying to either extend phase one or negotiate phase two. There have been conversations of what this will look like. Even the hostage families who are still waiting for their loved ones to come back home have been pressuring the government, saying, please, we need the rest of these hostages to come back out. We don't want war to continue because it could impact our loved ones that held in dire conditions. Remember, the hostages that have come out in emaciated states. We're hearing the testimonies of these people who have been held in darkness for more than 500 days. The conditions are so dire. And remember, these hostages have had no food. We've seen what these people have looked like when they've come out of Gaza. We've seen the torture. And I just want to make note that as this deal, this first phase, expired on Saturday, nearly at the same time it expired, Hamas released a really horrifying propaganda video of Yair Horn, one of the released hostages, departing from his brother, saying his final goodbyes. They were held in Hamas captivity for nearly the entire duration. And this is, if Hamas really did refuse and reject this deal, and then for them to put out this propaganda video, what does it tell the world? And that's something that I would pose to your viewers and listeners who are listening right now.
The images of the hostages being released have obviously struck a chord around the world, and particularly in Israel, which has obviously ramped up the urgency in terms of trying to release the remaining hostages. Has much thought then been given to what happens if and hopefully when those hostages are released? We've heard Donald Trump's extraordinary ideas for what Gaza could be. I mean, what is the reality going to be on the ground, presuming that with the prisoner release and the hostages release, we're moving into a final phase of this ceasefire?
Yeah, I think just any news regarding the hostages concerns the public, the society here in Israel, but these families who have been protesting, advocating for more than 500 days to get their loved ones out. You mentioned the conditions that we've seen of these hostages coming out. Absolutely completely different human beings that were kidnapped on October 7th and before. It's startling to see. Remember, at one point, people were comparing the hostages that came out to Holocaust survivors who were liberated from camps. This is what they looked like. And remember that part of the nation that built Israel are people that survived the Holocaust, people that still are alive. We actually had a funeral today of Shlomo Mansour, one of the hostages whose body was returned last week. He was a Holocaust survivor himself. He was kidnapped on October 7th. They also say he was murdered on October 7th, but taken from his home on Kibbutz Kisufim all the way down in the south. So for these Holocaust survivors to see the conditions of these Israelis coming out has struck a chord that most people will never understand. It's as if they're watching history be repeated.
Of course. No, I can understand that.
This urgency.
Yeah, no, I can completely understand that, Shosh, and you make that point very articulately. But my question was more about what happens, presuming the hostages are returned. What does the future look like in Gaza and Israel?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it's a question everyone here in Israel ponders. No one really knows what will happen, right? We've heard Trump's comments over the last few weeks of what he would like to see. And it's not necessarily a plan, but it's an idea, it's a proposal, but it hasn't really had any concrete steps of how to make his vision come to fruition. And I think that's what everyone here is worried about and what could happen. I think the number one thing for Israelis is they want to feel safe in Israel when it comes to their borders, getting rid of Hamas, making sure there is no more Hamas inside of Gaza, and that it is a place that can hopefully at one day in years flourish with peace, and that there is peace amongst Palestinians there and in Israel. I think it's important to also say there is peace between Palestinians and Israelis here in the country itself, and other cities in the north and the south here in Israel.